Okay, this is the flatworms, and I'm gonna go through these in alphabetical order on the ones that we have, starting with Clinorchus, Clinorchus sinensis. I'm looking for a good one here. There's a pretty good one. This is the Chinese liver fluke. It has a sucker at this end and a little pumping pharynx. It goes into a digestive system. You don't need to know any of that, but just to show you how the worm works. And these things, this is the adult form. This is part of the female reproductive system. There's another sucker. And way back here is the female reproductive system. There's the male reproductive system. Very commonly in flatworms, they're male and female at the same time. Very commonly, this is the tail end of the digestive system. But, you know, even at low power, you know, to draw it, you got to draw a little and move and draw a little and move. These things live in your liver and actually will just suck, your liver cells are loose enough, they can just suck cells in and eat. And a single one probably wouldn't even give you much in the way of symptoms unless you developed an allergy to it. Some people have had these guys, like one or two of them in their systems for decades, picked them up in the Korean War in the 1950s and still have them if the person is alive today. But if you're someplace where you can pick up a lot of these, they can be pretty dangerous because you get like 50 or 60 of them in your liver, it's gonna do some sizable amount of damage. It is picked up from eating raw or undercooked fish, but because of the way it passes from person to person through particular stages, it can't, you could release the eggs in the United States and it wouldn't be able to get to fish in the United States because it's got to go through a snail that it's compatible with, and we don't have the right snails here. They do in East Asia, though. That's why it's a Chinese liver fluke, but all across East Asia, you can get these guys. And as I said, Clinorchus sinensis. The next thing I've got is a kind of coccus. Wow, people have broken my cover slips. There we go. This is the full adult tapeworm. It is an unusual tapeworm in that it only has 3 segments. It keeps making new ones and dropping the end one off. But this is the entire adult tapeworm that lives in dogs. But the adults are not what cause the problems in people. People can be intermediate hosts for this, in which case the larvae can do some nasty stuff, which you'll see in your booklet if you choose a kind of coccus. But this is what they call a scolex. It's the part that they hang on to the lining of your intestine with. And a dog that has these can have hundreds of them because there's lots of room in a dog intestine. And keep in mind, this looks small, but this is magnified, so it's really a small animal. The Echinococcus granulosus. This one, I need you to bring these. This one is so big, it isn't worth putting on the microscope because all you do is look at a tiny little piece of it at a time. This is Fasciola hepatica, which is another type of liver fluke, but this is one that can live in people. And as you can see, you know, against an index card, it's a pretty big worm. Now we've got a schistosome. I talk about these quite a bit in lecture. Hard to do this with the video. I need to look through the scope. There we are. So this is a female,
You need to move it
unusual
down.
for, unusual for, let's see, play with the focus a little bit. It's not completely flat, so it's not all completely in focus all at once. Unusual for flatworms, schistosomes have separate males and separate females. There's one end of her. There's the other end of her. Getting there, getting there, getting there. This is They live in the linings of the intestines or the bladder, and crank out some fairly nasty eggs. And you'll see that when you look through the booklet. And still a major, major disease in the world that you probably have never heard of. Remember, there was an old sitcom where one of the characters tended to be a hypochondriac, and one day he decided he had schistosomiasis. But he didn't know, he couldn't have schistosomiasis because he lived in Cincinnati. That didn't really work. Now the last one I'm putting up is called Tinia, T-A-E-N-I-A. And what we've got here is a tiny part of one of the adults. The adults produce these reproductive segments that eventually mature and have male and female parts in it. This one is not mature because it's too close to the front end. See them get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller? And here's the end that attaches to the inside of your intestine, where it's big enough that even at low power, it's hard to get just parts of it in focus. Your intestine is a lot of nooks and crannies and bumps and stuff. And what it will do is it will push this in between some of the folds, and these are suckers. It's dark in your intestine. It wouldn't do it any good to have eyes, because they very rarely bring a flashlight with them. And also they can embed these little, they're shallow hooks, but they're pretty good at hanging on. And these things will just grow virtually the whole length of your intestine. And as I said, back here, whoops, they start to grow these, what are called proglottids. And the farther back you get, the more mature they get. There isn't room enough on a slide for them to really get matured. The really mature ones are probably 2 or 3 or 4 feet down the worm. But in my other classes where we really study these things, they look at the mature proglottids and they have male and female parts in them. And what eventually happens is you wind up with a proglottid at the very end that's just full of eggs. And that will either break open and dump the eggs and they go out the back end of you, or the proglottids will pass and break open and dump the eggs in the environment. And then they're gonna go through some stages to get to the next host. And that's part of the stuff that you're answering on the lab. So those are all of the different flatworms. So we're gonna stop there for the flatworms.